And I realized two things. Number one, there's no definition for this job. Number two, you have to figure out by trial and error, and mostly error than trial, what not to do, how to get the best out of people, how to fix social issues, psychological issues, musical issues. It's just that's your job. You just got to fix every problem and see them coming before they arrive, try to head them off, try to make the best out of whatever the situation is, and just make everybody feel like they're part of something that's really cool. And that's kind of what I learned. And that's what I took away. And certainly served me well in my early years, just knowing that nobody knows anything.
Welcome to The Creative Asylum, a weekly podcast that digs deep into the minds of visionary creators of all stripes. Musicians, actors, filmmakers, writers, artists, cartoonists, and cultural disruptors. Here, we'll discuss perspectives of living life on your own terms. Life lessons that keep us grounded, insane, and sometimes pull us back from the edge. So, take a deep breath, loosen your grip on the bland and the boring. This is your weekly prescription for authentic living, creative clarity, and hopefully, a little bit of cultural rebellion.
Side effects may include spontaneous joy, existential epiphanies, and an uncontrollable urge to do weird and beautiful things.
Hey everybody, it's July 14th, 2026. My name is Daniel, and I want to thank you for being here for another episode of The Creative Asylum. Today's guest is Steve Berlin, probably best known as a longstanding member of the LA-based band Los Lobos. He is the sax player. He's also produced or co-produced the majority of their records. Steve also has a very deep and long history in the early LA punk scene as a member of the band The Plugs, The Blasters with Phil and Dave Alvin, and he was also on the first two records with Flesh Eaters. He has done a ton of work as a session musician, playing with artists like R.E.M., Sheryl Crow, John Lee Hooker, Willie Nelson, and is a sought-after producer as well, having worked with and produced, as I already mentioned, Los Lobos, but also bands like Tragically Hip, Ricky Lee Jones, Ozomatli, ton of bands. This conversation with me and Steve was from a hotel room in Denver, where, in fact, he was there to produce a record for another band. I feel honored to have him here. I feel thankful to have you here. So let's get over the conversation with Steve Berlin. Good morning, Steve.
Howdy.
Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to hang out with me for a little bit on the Creative Asylum. It's really nice to have you here.
My pleasure. Good to meet you.
You're out on the road performing, or are you producing a record, or some of both?
I'm producing a record in Denver.
Okay, great. How long are you there for?
Till Saturday.
Cool. Well, I hope it turns out beautifully, and keep us posted, I guess.
I appreciate that.
I'm going to start with a story that goes back to Los Lobos. I was aware of Los Lobos for a long time, but the record that first really grabbed my attention was La Pistola y el Corazón. But it was Kiko that completely just blew my mind. It was probably my favorite record for 2 years. And I still think it's one of the best records ever made, period. End of story. And that whole run in the 90s, really, I thought was amazing. I thought Colossal Head was astounding, and I thought that this time was astounding.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The specific story is, I don't know what year it was. It was whatever year Kiko came out or the year after. You guys played Bumbershoot up in Seattle, because that's where I was living at the time. And there was one point where you guys did a rendition of Just a Man, and I have never had a performance of a song hit me so intensely, and I was literally just sobbing tears from that song. I don't know if something was going on in my life to where I was easily triggered emotionally, but there was such an intense emotion to how you performed that song on that day that I couldn't stop. And the song stopped, and then the crying stopped.
We did something with the Hendrix family that day, and I think, if anything, there might have been a little bit of us channeling the Jimmy vibe.
Yeah.
Just throwing that out there. I just vaguely remember, because I was living in Seattle then too. I lived in Seattle. I lived in Seattle from 87 to 2005.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was there from 81 to 2003. So actually, you've been in the Pacific Northwest for decades.
Yeah.
at this point.
Yeah.
Where are you located?
Vancouver, Washington.
Okay, just right over the border.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm actually going to be in Portland in, I guess, about a week and a half for a few days.
Nice.
So I'm looking forward to see a lot of my friends there. Was 87 when you moved from LA?
Yeah. Yeah. I basically took the first La Bamba check and split.
Yeah. Did you just want to get out of LA or was there something specific about Seattle that drew
It
you?
was a funny story, actually. I was working on a record that was kind of problematic. And I came home and I was very recently married. I'd just been married like not even like 3 months at that point.
Hmm.
And it was February, dead of winter in LA, which is nothing.
Which is springtime in Seattle.
Yeah, right. And my wife and I are both from Philadelphia. And I was like, let's just go somewhere where it feels like winter, like let's go just somewhere.
Right.
So we said, let's just go to Seattle. Like literally like spur of the moment, the kind of things you do when you're, as young as I was. We're like just went to the airport, got on a plane, went to Seattle. And I
Right.
had a friend in Seattle and, we were literally not married, not even like 4 months. And I said to my friend up there, I said, one day we're going to start a family. And, I think Seattle's one place that we would consider. Can you, this is way before the internet. Like, could you make me a map of the parts of town you think I would like? Because the only part of Seattle I had ever seen at that point was the clubs that I played with, the Blasters. I'm not even sure if the Lobos I played in Seattle a couple of times, but I just saw the downtown. I never really saw any place that anybody lived, back then anyway. So he made me a map, and I still have it. And he just circled these different parts of the city, and it was A B C D E F, and A was Vashon Island.
Okay.
So we were like, hey, that sounds great. So we flew to Seattle, got there late, woke up, foggy, typical Seattle February day, gray and misty. We go to the ferry dock and take the ferry, and we're like completely enchanted at this point. We're just like, this is a dream. This is like
Uh-huh.
everything's magical. Like, the smell of wood smoke in the air, just like this whole thing. And I'll make this story as brief as possible. But again, pre-internet. Um, and so when you go to Vashon Island, it's the ferry dock is at the bottom of this giant hill. The island is basically just a big rock. So you go straight up the hill when you get off the ferry. And at that time, at the top of the hill, there was a realtor's office that said free island maps. And we had no idea where we were going. It wasn't, pre-Google. So we stopped for a map and the guy was like, hey, do you want a guide? Like, it's a rainy, it's a foggy, smoggy day. No one's coming in today. I might as well, if you want a Sherpa, I'll show you around. We're like, sure. Yeah. I said, we're not buying a house today, but that sounds great. So we drove around for a while and he, very charming guy. And he goes, look, by that point we'd had lunch together. He goes, look, can I just drive by a couple of houses just so I could say that I did something, remotely related to my job today? I said, yeah, sure, whatever. So, and it's not, Vashon Island, for those who haven't been, it's not like Martha's Vineyard. It's not instantly charming. It has, it's actually kind of a blue collar, as much as an island off the coast
Yeah.
of Seattle can be. It's not exactly charm filled, put it that way. I mean, it has its charm, but it's not like the San Juan Islands, any one of those, you get off the ferry, you're just like, literally, it's a storybook. Vashon was at that time, it was like a commuter. You could take a ferry to Seattle. So drive around, nothing architecturally fascinating. We're like, okay, let's go home. He goes, I got one more place. Like, okay. So the ferry dock's the north end of the island. And there's like, again, like a giant rock. So you're looking way down on the ferry dock. And at that time, the fog had cleared and it looked like you could see like all the way to Alaska. And so he goes, all right, we're here. And we're like we're nowhere. There's no house. There's just like there's two giant trees with a little path. And I go, what do you mean we're here? And he goes, well, follow me. So we go down
Oh,
this
nice.
trail along the water, and it's just like winding and going. It's like this thing. And then at the bottom of the trail, there's this incredible house that was built in the 20s. And at that time, the banks wouldn't loan on it because it was considered exotic because you couldn't drive up to it. Much too long of a story short, we ended up buying that house and we lived there for 17 years. So
The day that you were not buying a house today is the day you bought a
we
house.
bought a house and we lived there, and it was great because that was the grunge. That was like right as grunge was happening. Like Seattle was the musical center of the universe, and I got there. I tend to get to places right as they blow up. So I got to L.A. right as that blew up. I got to Seattle right when that blew up. I got to Portland right when that blew up. It's not like I have anything to do with it. I don't know. My compass points towards musical explosions, I guess.
That's great. I mean, I was at that time, 87, I was in one of those bands, a band you may or not have ever heard of. I don't know, a band called Skin Yard.
Yeah, I
And,
remember Skinner. Wow, that's cool.
okay, well, yeah. And actually, over the course of 6 years, we had 4 drummers. And our final drummer was actually a drummer that you were in a band with as well at a later date, which was Tuatara with Barrett
Yeah, I was gonna
Martin.
say it had to be Barry Martin. Yeah,
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious about that's my sloppy little pivot, I am curious about how that project came to be, or how your involvement with Tuatara came to be, because that was such a different kind of project. I think of it in terms of being Barrett's project, but I think it's actually more like Peter Buck's project, or
yeah, I would say it was as much Barrett's as anybody's. Um, I was uh, I was really close with Skerritt, my friend and my hero, saxophone
yeah,
player, and so we would just try to get into fun trouble. And whenever either one of us was doing something interesting, he'd call me, I called him. Let's go do this. So if I'm not mistaken, it came like he called me and said, "Hey, they're putting this thing together." And at that point, I think I had just met Peter Buck because he was a recent arrival in Seattle. He married Stephanie, who
yeah,
ran
yeah,
the Crocodile, where we
yes,
had played a
indeed.
couple times.
And
So,
they had twins. They had
yeah,
twins,
they
I
had the
think.
twins, right?
Yeah.
So it was sort of like, in that era, that was like, I mean, Seattle was a wonderful place back then because everybody did everything with everybody. Like
Yes.
nobody, like you could call yourself a punk rock or whatever it was, but you were guaranteed you were playing jazz with Wayne Horvitz, or you're playing something with somebody, or you're in another band with one of the guys in, Alice in Chains. It's just like everybody, it was a very free flowing musical family, and nobody felt that they had to do, oh, I just do, I'm just doing this thing. Everybody did everything, and it was, Pearl Jam, those guys were in the middle of a lot of it. Stone Studio was there was a hub of sorts. But it was great. It was, and it was, I don't know, it spent like 2 days in the studio, I think, 3 days. Yeah, it was just like, wonderful people, great songs. Like we just kind of slapped the thing together. I do have another story about the title of the record, the Trading with the
Okay.
Enemy. I had been doing, and I'm still doing a lot of production work in Canada, and I had produced a band called the Tragically Hip up there. I still a cigar smoker, and
Okay.
they very graciously gave me a box of Cohiba Esplendidos, which are basically like small baseball bat sized cigars, like way too, like they're too much for me even. So I had just finished, what would have been the first record. So it was Phantom Power for hip fans, and they were driving me. So their studio was in a town called Bath, which is like south of a town called Kingston, where they grew up. So they were driving me. It was like $500 cheaper to go from Syracuse or Buffalo. I can't remember which one it was then, from than going back to Toronto or Montreal. So we're driving across the border. It's 2 days before Christmas. It's full on snowstorm, like 9 foot drifts everywhere, and we're crossing the border. And the guitarist Paul in the Tragically Hip had just bought a brand new Jeep, like literally like the newest, latest model. And those, like they look. I don't look. I've never looked like a rock guy, but those guys looked like rock guys. And I guess the customs guys had nothing better to do, so they literally just rousted us, and had to like dump out everything. And of course, they found the cigars.
In the middle
So
of the snow, right?
in the middle of a
Yep,
snowstorm, and
yep.
like, it's Christmas, so how the hell am I gonna get home? And they held me up there for 4 hours. I, needless to say, missed my flight. And again, all my stories, long story short, I ended up getting literally a thing from the State Department that says, "You are officially a traitor to your country, and you are trading with the enemy." Trading with the enemy. And I was telling the guys that story, and they said,
Because of the
"There's
cigars?
because of cigars, trading with the enemy." It's
Oh
like
my god.
they charged me like $50 for each cigar, so it was like ridiculous amount of money. And it's still on my record. I still, every time I still get hustled. This is what, how many years ago? 37 years ago. Still, so I can't get Nexus or Lexus. It's still, oh, you smuggled. I didn't smuggle, but that's what it looks like anyway. So I told the two Atari guys, and they said, "Oh, that's the album. That's a great album title." So
That's a great story.
that's how the record got named, "Trading with the Enemy." Yeah,
Wow. You criminal.
I know, I know. I'm a hero in Cuba, though. That's the other part. Like I can go to Cuba, and I'm
Right, right.
I'm like Che.
You're a revolutionary.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah, I had a similar experience at that same border. It probably wasn't that exact same border, but it was winter time. It was snowy. It was cold as hell, and we had hair down to our asses, and we weren't going into Canada. Of course, we were coming into the U.S. because it was always easy getting to Canada, but coming back
Not
was,
so much anymore, but yeah,
they did the same thing. They made a stop and they literally tore apart the entire van, everything strewn about all over in the snow. We're sitting out there freezing. And I remember they wouldn't even let us go inside the building. That was like part of
jeez.
the tortures. No, you have to sit here and suffer. And then,
Uh,
after they literally spent like close to 2 hours just tearing everything apart, going through everything and, of course not putting anything back, and then we had to put everything back and put it. And it was just like it was a total power trip.
yep. Yeah.
And we didn't even have cigars. I think they thought they'd find like, drugs and pot or whatever, but
Yeah,
they
clearly.
probably found a bunch of empty beer bottles or something. I don't know. So that's an amazing story though. That's pretty
Uh,
fantastic. How many two guitar records were there, or how many did you play on all
I
of them?
think there were 3, and I was on part I don't think I was on the last one. I think, I had moved away. I think I
Hmm.
moved to Portland by that point, or I was just
Okay.
not available. I mean,
So you were in Vashon and then Portland
yeah,
and now Vancouver?
yeah, yeah, exactly. There was some reason why I mean, I would it's not like, I wasn't fired, but, there was some reason why I couldn't be part of it. But,
Yeah.
there was, recently Barrett sent some stuff around, so there might be another one. I told him anytime, anywhere,
Oh,
I'm
really?
down, yeah.
Barrett is actually I need to have him on. I was just thinking about that this morning. I need to get in touch with him and just say, dude.
He's a unique individual. Yeah, he's endlessly fascinating, like, him and Peter now kind of basically live in Brazil and produce records down there. I don't know if you know about all this stuff, but they have this, like,
Yeah, I know he's got a house in what, Olympia, I think.
yeah, but they spend, every time I reach out to him, like, "Oh, yeah, I'm in Brazil, I'm producing records with Peter," like, "Good for you." So yeah, they're doing great
Yeah,
as
I
far as
think
I
he
could
won a
tell.
Grammy, didn't he?
Did he?
Didn't he
Wow,
win a
that'd be cool.
Grammy for producing some record down there? I
They
think
that
he
would I
did.
hope he did.
I'll double check. I'll have him on the show and I'll ask him about it. And speaking of Grammys, you've won 5 Grammys.
Well, I've actually got more than that, because I was winning them before the producers got them. Like, in the early, like, when my career started,
Okay, yes.
producers didn't get them. So, like, the first Lobos record, I was in the band, but I wasn't in the band as far as the category was concerned. So I have, 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 5 from the era before producers got them, and then 5 since.
Did you ever imagine yourself as like a young punk rock dude in LA, eventually like having a shelf full of Grammys?
No. I did not.
It's amazing.
It is kind of amazing. I take, it's always a nice day when that happens, and I had one this year. I won one this year as well. So and it's always, 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 never, oh, it's always great. And I will say, I take a lot of pride in the fact that it's not in any, like, all this, everything. It's like Ozomatli, Lobos, Buckwheat Zydeco, now Clifton Chenier. So kind of like, I've not, I've managed to do it somehow without getting typecast. So that's a patting myself on
That's especially
whatever.
good as a producer, right? Are you producing more these days? Or are you playing more? Or is it kind of equal?
I would have to say it's really more producing. We're
Hmm.
I mean, you wouldn't know it, but we're Lobos is kind of slowing down. We're intentionally playing a little less, trying to be more purposeful than just like taking every gig. So it would, like, as I survey it, it seems like I'm doing more of this. Like, I'm in Denver now. I started another record week after next. Got like 4 of them in different stages of production. So
Wow, that's great.
it is great. It's exactly the life I wished from myself, and I'm living it. So nothing but gratitude, and I will try not to whine as best I can, because there's nothing dumber than somebody as lucky as I am whining about anything. So
Yeah. Well, it makes sense to me that Los Lobos would be slowing down because being in a band it's not easy work. And everybody's getting older, except for me, of course.
yeah, and me, of course. No, I have to say it actually is working out great because,
Yeah.
we it's not like we take, it's like the gigs that we do seem to be like more like we're not like we used to be on the road literally like, 200 days a year, it seemed like, and now it's probably under 100, I would think. So the gigs mean more.
Just still a lot.
Still a lot, but less than what we're used to, and it just to me, it's like I look forward to playing every day. Like we're playing this weekend. I've been here in Denver working on a record. I'm looking forward to playing my horn again. So I'm not the guy that wants to slow down ever. Like I'll
Sure.
I'll do whatever. But I get it. It makes sense, and it makes everybody a little happier, a little healthier, and a little more appreciative of what we're doing when we do it, because it's not literally constant. It's not all the time. It feels less
Right.
like, work and more like this is fun. This is what it's supposed to feel like.
I can't imagine touring that much. I mean, I haven't toured in years, and I never missed it because I never liked it that much.
Huh.
You know,
Well, at this point, we have like families everywhere we go, pretty much, for better or worse, I will say.
is most of
So
the band in L.A. or are they spread
everybody,
all?
no, everybody's in LA. I'm the only outlier.
But you, right?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
that's why they have airplanes, I guess, right?
yeah. And it's really no big deal. I mean, I'm 2 hours away
Yeah.
from Portland. I mean, I could, literally get a call in the morning and be there by, whatever, by 2. So
When you first arrived in L.A., going back to the early punk rock days in what, the 80s, I think? No, your 70s, right?
I arrived Christmas Day or Christmas Eve, 74. I was a callow youth of 19.
That's how old I was when I moved to Seattle in 81. So kind of same kind of deal. Were you thinking yet about producing, or were you just sort of, I'm a saxophone player and a
No,
flute
I
player
honestly, I
and
was. And it was always like
yeah,
I'm not sure. Like, I think I sort of became like conscious of what it was. I was an obsessive record fan like everybody else. And Um,
right,
I but I paid in particular attention to the stuff on the back of the record. Like, why is this band sound better when it has these credits than these credits? Like, why does Little Feat's first 2 records sound better than the 3rd record? Like, oh, it was, so it's Russ Templeman, and then it was, I forget who produced the 3rd, so it's like, I kinda became conscious of, like, why does it change so much? Why does it sound so much better when and this and that, and then I sorta, like, started fantasizing about recording studios and what they must be like and all that stuff, and kind of, like, dreaming of what this mysterious job is, 'cause, when you're a musician, you pretty much know what you're doing. When you're a producer, it's like you're inventing it every day, like, literally, you're inventing your job, not even every day, like, every hour some days. You're trying to, make something happen, so there wasn't, like, a manual or a book or a YouTube on how to produce records. So I just sort of became fascinated by it, like what that meant. And then I joined a band in Philly called Skyline. There's like 6 guys in the band. 3 of them were like 10 years older than I was at 15 and 16. And we cut like not a record, but like just a tape to get gigs. And like just like I was the only guy that was there early, stayed late. I just wanted to like absorb as much of the process as I can. Even then, not necessarily going, oh, I'm gonna be a record producer one day, but I just wanted to see and experience and try and, imagine what it would be like to do it. So like even then I was doing that. And then one of the things that happened when I moved to LA, that's when I was serious about it. Like I really wanted to be a record producer
Mhm.
in addition to a musician. So started working with a guy named Brian Beverly, and we put together a band together called the Pep Boys. And I produced a demo tape that actually got us signed to Tacoma, and this would
Wow,
be 77.
that's John Fahey's label, isn't it?
John Fahey's label. It was my first attempt at producing anything, and it actually worked out. Got Brian signed, and we ended up getting in somehow or another. The tape got to Paul Rothchild, who produced The Doors, among many others. And I will never forget the day that Paul Rothchild called me and asked me how I got these sounds on the demo tape, because I literally didn't know what the fuck I was
Really?
doing. But the legendary producers in the world is asking me how I did it. And I'm like, what the hell? So Paul and I became good friends, and him and Aaron Russo, if you remember these names, managed the Pep Boys for a while. But it was
Yeah.
not to last long. But it was like kind of in that era, like the same era that like Top Jimmy, and I was in band with a guy named Fast Freddy called the Precisions. It was just very free flowing. But I will say this, but I had produced a record, this is kind of like the really early days of that. And like nobody else that I knew had, like recording was completely foreign to most of the people that I was hanging out with, like the Blasters, like
Right.
Los Lobos, like nobody had really done it. And I guess somehow, some way I did. So it was kind of interesting in a certain respect, but I get, obviously it wasn't a big hit, but I knew the process and I kind of understood what it was. And it was an aspiration that I shared with, for instance, the guys in Los Lobos. I managed to cajole some people into letting me do stuff and learning more. And, I just kind of figured it out like everybody else does.
And I think it probably helps to be a musician as a studio person as well,
Yeah.
because
Yes.
you're viewing it from a different perspective.
Yes, because like I can empathize. I have been the guy in front of the mic on the other side of the glass that's literally shitting his pants because nothing's working. I mean,
Yeah.
I know what it feels like, on both sides. I know what it's like to be producing somebody that's shitting their pants. I know what it's like to be the guy shitting their pants because you sound like shit. So,
Right. Right.
yeah, I have deep, deep empathy for everybody that tries to do what we do.
I always felt like I should have paid better attention all the time I spent in the studio because, our guitar player was Jack Endino, and
Well, there you go. Yeah.
and he clearly knew what the hell he was doing,
I love Jack
and he was
Andino.
really good at his job.
He's a wonderful dude. Please say hi to him if you talk to him.
I will. I will. I'm probably going to be talking to him in the next couple of days. Yeah. But, I was always in the studio with him and he was always doing the thing. And to this day, I still was like, why didn't I pay better attention? Because I'm curious in that way. And if I walked in the studio, I'd be like, I have no clue. And, I'm getting ready to try to start doing some stuff, like home stuff with a DAW. And I'm going to be going in as blind as a human can be.
Well,
So I
here's the
missed
good
the
news.
opportunity, but yes,
There's a million YouTube videos. There's literally nothing too stupid. Nothing, I stress, underline, nothing too stupid that there isn't a YouTube video telling you how to do it. Don't feel
I
embarrassed. Like
believe it.
everybody, even I, sometimes have to go to a YouTube and go, how the fuck do I do this? Why is this not working? As recently as like yesterday, like something that should be working wasn't. So like, what am I doing wrong? So you have, there's lots and lots and lots of tools out there and user groups and lots of people, willing to
YouTube's
help.
amazing.
It is amazing.
And when I decided to start a podcast, I'm like, I don't know the first thing. And where did I go? YouTube. And I probably spent about 4 weeks just absorbing and taking notes and watching things. I'm like, I think I'm ready to do this. So yeah, I think it'll be the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool. Like most people that are like a musician producer, the question would be like, which came first? And it sounds like with you, it was really like very much parallel, both together at the
I was
same
a musician
time.
first. I mean, I was definitely,
Okay.
I started, playing when I was what, 12, 11 even. That was what, kids in the late '60s did. Like there's nothing cooler than being in a band, right? I mean, still, I hope, but
Yeah.
back then it was, how to meet girls, like how to hang out with your buddies, like, how to get stoned,
Yes.
like, it's like it checked off a lot of boxes.
How to
You know
get
what I
stoned.
mean?
I wonder if there's a YouTube video for that.
Yeah, there might be, but,
How to get stoned.
yeah, it was, that's where I started, and I was lucky enough, to play with, way better players than I was, so I got to, I got to see what it would look like to be a good musician very, very early. I was lucky enough to be around really good musicians, guys that were playing, like, for instance, on the Philly International records, like some of the biggest records of that era were my friends, and I got to play with them and kind of see the process and see how much, how far I had to go to be a decent musician, much less a professional. Um, but it was great. Yeah, it was great. And Philly was like literally the best place in the world to be a musician. I think in many respects it still is because you had, it was great musical culture, great, amazing players everywhere you look of every genre. It wasn't New York, so you could
Mhm.
afford to live there. You didn't have to worry about, getting robbed, every block. Um,
Yes.
and, it was just a great environment to be, and I learned, a lot of what I would call, like, professionalism I learned from the people that I just met, hung out with when I was, a young teenager, like just to see how hard they worked and how, nobody fucked around. You had to and you never said no to a gig. That was the other thing. Like
Okay.
that has served me really well, as I went through my life of never saying, like, you could learn from every gig. There's something to learn from every gig, no matter how stupid or lame or shitty it turns out to be. There is a giant learning experience that you will not get from not doing it. So just say yes and go. And that, like, how did I join Los Lobos? They said, "You want to play this music?" I said, "Yes." So say yes and go.
Right.
That's my advice to young musicians everywhere.
Say yes. Say yes.
Say yes. What's the worst that can happen?
If you're enjoying this conversation, please make sure you hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video, leave a comment, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. It's the quickest way to grow our channel, and it's absolutely free. You can also subscribe to our other channels on social media. Check out our Instagram at Creative Asylum CA, that's the letter CA, or on TikTok at The Creative Asylum, that's all one word. Our website is thecapod.com, and our Facebook profile is the same, facebook.com/thecapod. All right, back to the episode. So Philly was a great place to be a musician, and yet, still, you moved to LA. So what drove that decision? Was it looking all those notes at the back of the records and seeing
Yeah,
producers?
some part of it. So I tried college for a minute, and I realized that if I did what I wanted to do, no one was ever going to
Yeah,
ask for my degree.
right.
And I was in Philly playing with the band that backed up a band called the Soul Survivors. So the Soul Survivors had one big hit called "Expressway to Your Heart." They were the only white band ever signed by Philly International. So they were really very soulful players. It was sort of like, I don't know, they were just two Italian brothers, Ritchie and Charlie Ingui, and who were like soul singers through and through and through. And their band, which were these guys that had moved to Philly from New York, who had also two brothers, the Beckmeyer brothers, Freddie and Stevie, who had played with Paul Butterfield and Stevie
Oh, wow.
Wonder. I mean, they had really had a career, but they ended up in Philly, and they were my friends, and we would get together and jam. I was never in the Soul Survivors, but they had like a practice space downtown on 3rd Street in Philly, so I would just go and hang out, and they were my pals. They were, again, like 10 years older than me, but we got along great. So
Mhm.
they decided they were going to move to LA, and this would be earlier in 74. And within literally not even a couple months of them landing, they became the backing band for both Greg Allman and Billy Preston. That's how badass they were. I mean, they were really, really good. So they're like, "You got to come to LA. This is like, it's easy pickings.
It's happening. It's
It's
happening.
happening." And, I didn't really need to be, I mean, they were those are my favorite guys to play with. So it didn't really take a lot of cogitating on my part to go. So I left and landed, um, yeah, like I said, Christmas 74, and within 2 weeks of my arrival, they lost both gigs. So, I don't
No
think
way.
it wasn't,
Oh,
well,
man.
Billy was dealing with, he had a predilection for boys, and, so he was chased out of California for that, and I actually did one rehearsal with Greg, and I actually co-wrote one song that was on one of his records with, Stevie Beckmeyer, who was the guitar player in the band. I got to one rehearsal. It was amazing. Like, I was a huge Allman Brothers and Little Feat were my two,
Sure.
those were my hero bands, and I'm playing with my hero, Greg Allman. Can't believe it, but it was one day, one rehearsal, and that was the Cher era when he was married to Cher. So it was like also like, like deep Hollywood shit. Like all this is happening within like not even a month of my arriving there. Like I'm like, playing with my hero, paparazzi outside the rehearsal studio, like all this shit is happening. Like, and I'm 19. This is like, what is going on here? This is
Right.
amazing. So rehearsal went well. I guess I'm in the band. This is amazing. Like all my dreams are coming true. So that night, Greg took us to, there's a restaurant called Dar Maghreb. It was a Moroccan restaurant on Sunset. And I can remember, I don't know if it's still there, but like West Hollywood in LA. And it was very, 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 very fancy. You get ushered into, take your shoes off and you're ushered into your own little room, and they bring you like tea and stuff. And this was, of course, the coke and weed, like coke everywhere. So like we're just
Right.
going crazy, like sniff, sniff, snort, snort, whatever. Like we're just going nuts, and ordering everything off the menu and just like drinks and food, and and this is like, literally, like I'm just, this is a dream. And like somebody says, "Hey, anybody seen Greg?" I'm like, nah. Like snort, smoke, snort, drink, snort, smoke.
Yeah.
An hour goes, "Hey, where's Greg?" Snort, smoke. I don't know. He's here somewhere. Snorts, drink, and then, like we realize that Greg split, and so
Wow.
we're all in this restaurant. Greg's gone, and the bill is like
Uh-huh.
$2,500 for all this stuff, and we're like, "Hey, we're Greg Holman's band. Like this is on him." We're like, "No, no, you're not. You're like somebody's got to pay this bill."
Oh man.
So that was when, again, tabloid era, he disappeared, and it was like literally like you couldn't go to a newsstand. Like Greg Allman disappeared. Like this whole, it was like every newsstand. My new employer has gone missing. It turns out he went to the desert, and they found him with like 4 15-year-old girls, and it was like, pictures of like Cher, like this, and like just remember like going to the market, and there was like a National Enquirer, like the front page was, Greg, like being like frog marched by some cops, and a picture of Cher like staring at him. So that ended that pretty quickly. But
Wow.
I survived.
That's a story.
The band went on to become a band. Like we're not just backing up people. We started playing as a band, and we got, this was this is way before punk rock, way before any of this shit. This is sort of like the Boz Skaggs, Silk Degrees era. So we were not that, but we had like songwriters that wrote like, sort of like white R&B, more or less, you could say. And so we got, it was, we got to be good enough to be noticed. And we had a demo tape produced by Bob Margouleff, who produced Stevie Wonder, because our guitar player knew him, and that got us a deal on Casablanca, which, for those who don't know,
Okay.
was like legendary for putting out all the big disco records of the late
Disco, yeah.
'70s. Donna Summer, YMCA, I think, was on Casablanca.
Don't forget the cocaine.
Yes, I was going to say it
Right.
was literally a no deal was ever consummated by checks or cash. It was all consummated by coke. So
Okay.
it was, and our manager was somebody's coke dealer, so he got us, like that was how stuff happened. And again, this is, what am I, 21, 22? So, like I'm still wide-eyed and like trying to like put all this together, but it's all happening. We're assigned, we're making a record, and unfortunately Bob Margouleff decided he didn't want to do it. So we were assigned a producer, a guy named Chris Brunt. Chris's main claim to fame is he had produced the Moody Blues after their hits. So he produced the one when the Moody Blues were on their way down. Chris had produced their records, but somehow or another, I guess he must have had good blow. He got on Casablanca's radar, and he was assigned to be our producer. And finally, in my life, like finally, I get to see what a real producer does. Like he's getting whatever he got, I think a lot of money, to me, whatever a lot of money was back then, to produce us. And I'm like, oh boy, here we go. Like I'm gonna really see how the big boys do it. This is great. And the guy was like, nice enough fellow, but literally, like for instance, our drummer got poached by Barry White. So the drummer of that band was the guy that you heard on all the Barry White, all those great songs. Alvin Taylor, still going,
Yeah.
still playing, still amazing musician. So we had to get a new drummer. And I, like, again, everything is dreamlike. I said, what about Ritchie Hayward, my favorite drummer on earth? And lo and behold, we reached out to Ritchie. He said yes. So Ritchie comes to rehearsal. He's doing Ritchie Hayward stuff. Sounds amazing. Sounds like Ritchie Hayward. Super nice guy. Super happy to be there. And so, it's like, okay, we got Ritchie in the band. And Chris goes, oh, I have questions about his groove. Like, this is like posh English accent. You're going to tell me that Ritchie Hayward, you British ponce, has questions about Ritchie Hayward's groove? Like, fuck you. But I was not producing the record, and so Chris got his wish, and so we replaced. I can lose.
Right.
We replaced Ritchie Hayward with a guy named Daoud Shaw, who was the drummer on the Saturday Night Live band at the era. So that was his big claim to fame. I mean, again, super nice guy, great musician, not Ritchie Hayward, but we made the record, and I got to see this guy, not that I had any affinity for his work, but I thought, this is what a real producer does. And quite literally, every decision he made was wrong. Every decision It was like
Wow.
chocolate cake over here and pile of shit over here. You go, I want to see what that pile of shit sounds like, like literally. And I'm just looking at and how this informs this conversation is like I thought to myself, well, I had produced a Brian Beverly record, I'd done this, and I said, no matter how bad I might be as a producer, I will never make as many mistakes as this guy. And this is a professional producer.
I will never choose the pile of shit.
Well, I was just like, and I realized two things. Number one, there's no definition for this job. Number two, you just have to develop an inner reason. You have to like figure out by trial and error, and mostly error than trial, what not to do, and how to be, how to get the best out of people, how to fix social issues, psychological issues, musical issues, technical issues, technical, stuff. It's just like that's your job. You just got to fix every problem and see them coming before they arrive, try to head them off, try to make the best out of whatever the situation is, and just make everybody feel like they're part of something that's really cool. Not that hard to some, hard for Chris. And that's kind of what I learned, and that's what I took away. And, that certainly served me well in my early years, like just knowing that nobody knows anything. It's like the Yogi Bear quote, like, thing about baseball is nobody knows anything. So it's like, yeah, thing about producing is nobody really knows anything.
You were talking about sort of all of the aspects of being a producer, not just doing the right things, but also being like a peacemaker, right?
Yeah. Well, it's just sort of like, I would say more problem solving. I mean, basically
Okay.
a lot of it is your, you have to sort of imagine, what the record could be, and you have to sort of like listen closely to what the artist is saying, because sometimes what they're saying and what they want are not necessarily the same thing.
Right.
But a lot of it is just literally creative problem solving and/or trying doors until one opens that sometimes, you open a door and it's a vault full of wonderful things, or it's a pathway to something that opens to a vault, or sometimes it's a short bridge off a cliff. But yeah, you just sort of like you just literally problem solve and try and like the main mission is really just trying to make everything as good as it can possibly be, and to know, very important,
Yeah.
to know when it is as good as it can possibly be, because it's very, very easy
Mm.
to spend an inordinate amount of time on something that is as good as it is ever going to be. And I often, like, I have this thing that I say to artists sometimes is like, we get to a point and it's like, we're at the end of the record and they want to invest time on a song. And I will say to them, and, that we're out of money, out of time, whatever it is. And I'll say, well, I think the horizon is like this. We can spend a day or two making the 12th best song on the record, the ninth best song on the record. Is that what you want to do? You know what I
Right.
mean? So it's like, it's not going to be the single. It's not going to be the top five. It's not going to be the top eight. We're going to make the 12th best song, the ninth best song, and everything else will move down. Is that worth $2,000 and 2 days of hard work? Possibly. More likely not. But that's a thing. That's a skill that you have to learn the hard way.
So how much of being a producer, I guess it probably depends on the people in the band, but like how much of it just involves being a peacemaker with, difficult personalities who are bickering in the studio, or is it just dependent on the band?
It depends on a lot of stuff. I mean, sometimes even bands that get along famously, that arrives. And sometimes there's that tension is built in. Like sometimes, Rolling Stone, I mean, think about it. There's so many great bands over the years, Oasis, that the tension is kind of the engine that makes them who they are. The Blasters, that the tension with all of them was made them like, I don't remember any peaceful days with those guys, but they were one of the best bands, certainly one of the best bands of that era, and one of the best bands ever, in my opinion. But it was every day was about that
Is that because
tension.
of Dave and Phil?
Dave and Phil, and well, everybody. I mean, they were all just like everybody in that band kind of had their own idea of what the band should be and sound like, and Phil and Dave being the most important. But tension can be positive. It can be a good thing. It could be, if you ameliorate it and focus the energy towards the right thing. It could also break up a band, because I've been front row seat for that in the studio as well.
Yeah.
So it just sort of depends on how you use it. Some things are not fixable. That's the other thing too. It's like some things you can't, that's another part of the deal, is that you got to learn the hard way when something just can't be fixed, or it won't be improved. It can only be wherever it is that's as good as it's gonna get, or it could go south very fast. So, again, it's a lot of that.
Let's go back to the Flesh Eaters, because after
Sure.
after Casablanca, that experience, right? After that is when Flesh Eaters first happened, right?
Yeah, well, it was so this would be what, 78, more or less. And again, I was the youngest guy in this band that I was in, and they were happy where they were. I was always looking for something interesting. I was always like, my antenna has always been pretty high for new and different and weird. So I was living in Venice, and I was hearing about this stuff going on in Hollywood at the place called The Mask. Like, what's The Mask? Like, and of course, at that point, the Ramones had happened, and it was Sex Pistols. So this thing is happening, but there's stuff happening in L.A. So I just sort of like began investigating and hanging out and meeting people. And I think, there's a guy I met who's named Fast Freddy, who was very key in a lot of what my life turned out to be, because he introduced me to the Blasters. He was a writer. He had a zine called Backdoor Man, for which many, like Jeffrey Pierce from the Gun Club, Don Snowden, who went on to Don Waller, a lot of people who went on to be like really important writers about music were writing for Backdoor Man and in bands. So Freddie had a band called the Precisions, and he heard me play with somebody and asked me to join, and I did. And the Precisions they weren't a great band by any stretch of the imagination, but they were kind of beloved because we were just like always fun. And Freddie had like the best record collection in the world. And so we would do like these really obscure R&B covers. And that was part of my education, because I was coming, my experience from Philly and all that stuff was more like modern R&B, not like 40s and 50s R&B. So I had to learn on the fly more or less quickly about what this music was and the role the saxophone played in it. And I had great teachers. Like Fast Freddie was great. Don Waller, a great friend of mine who also had like the world's best record collection. So they were like pumping all this stuff into my head. Like, you got to listen to this, got to listen to this, got to listen to this. So I was getting my education on the fly, more or less. But through Freddie, I met everybody X. Like, it was in that era, it was a very small scene. So like everybody knew everybody, and I got to know it, befriend everybody because I was in the Precisions. So one day, Dave Alvin, and this is way before I was in the Blasters, called me to say, what are you doing Friday night? And I said, whatever you tell me I'm doing. And he goes, we're going to go to the studio. We're going to cut a record with this guy named Chris D, who I didn't know anything about Chris D. And I said, well, what are we doing? And he goes, well, he's got some songs, we're going to play on them. Great. So turns out John Doe and Chris had written a bunch of these songs. This was the first Flesh Eaters. And it was just an amazing experience, because it was like, Chris is a really unique individual, like really, like there's nobody quite like him. And at this point, it was like before a lot of this, like the X hadn't really, I mean, X was X, but I think just the first record had come out. Just the first Blasters record had come out. So it was like the early days of what was going to be whatever you would call this punk rock explosion, whatever the hell you want to name it.
That first wave, basically.
The first wave. So it was early days. And it was like literally no rules, no nothing, tiny little recording studio on Hollywood Boulevard. And it was Don Bonebreak and Bill Bateman from the Blasters. So we had like two of the best drummers in the scene, more or less. John Doe playing bass, Dave Alvin playing guitar, me playing sax, and Chris D howling these dark, weird, mysterious songs. And it was incredible. I mean, it was really amazing. And it was like the songs were incredible. John was really writing at a high level. This was, the same time he was writing the second and third X records. So everything he was doing was just off the chart great. And, the record exists. I think we did 2 shows in that era at the Whiskey. By that time, I was playing with a bunch of different bands. Probably the Plugs was that was like my main band at that point. And of course, Top Jimmy, who, like one of the reasons why we're talking, like that was, I was playing. So from Freddie, I went to playing with Top Jimmy. I also got this weird job. So there's a Dutch film director named René Daalder, Daalder, who came to L.A. with this vision that all music was going to be sold visually, not necessarily by the radio, but it was like there was about to be a revolution in how people were consuming and finding about new bands, and it was all about videos. And this, mind you, was way before anybody heard of MTV or what it was going to be.
Right.
but he was insistent that like the music delivery system of the mid 70s was no longer applicable, and that he had to get ahead of this curve and start doing music videos. And to that end, he put a band together, not unlike Malcolm McLaren putting the Sex Pistols together. So Renee put a band together called the Screamers, which, depending on who you ask, would be probably the first punk band in L.A. Like the first band to break every rule that they could find. They had the look. I mean, everybody's seen the Tomato Duplantis was the singer, and his there was
And by the way, he was from the Pacific
and
Northwest originally.
from
Yeah.
Tacoma, I think, right? Um,
Yeah.
so they kind of, in their own weird way, exploded. But Renee was a very intuitive guy on a lot of different levels, and among those levels was he knew that he didn't know much about music, especially he didn't really know what was about to happen. Like he was like his vision was more about like shooting this, capturing this energy, but he was not a musician. So
Was he in the Screamers
no,
or
no,
he
he
just
was
kind of,
no, he was probably 20 years older than any of us. No, he was
oh, wow.
we're all like 20 years old. He's like 40, so he was like an old dude.
But he played a role in assembling the band?
He just had this idea that he had this like he looked around, what was then this developing punk rock scene.
Right.
And I guess he knew Tomato from something. Like he knew a couple of these guys, and they basically the vision was this visually striking band that he was then going to shoot videos and movies about and basically create effectively like his version of the Sex Pistols, although
Okay.
musically it could not have been more different. These guys were not political at all. And it was, mind you, in the punk rock era, which was snarling guitars, was on 11, there was no guitar player. It was 3 keyboardists and a drummer and Tomato,
Right.
which was in its own way like as wacky as anything else. I mean, there was some German, like I guess, German bands. I'm not that much of a fan of that music, but I'm sure there were bands like sort of with the same idea, but not with this kind of energy. Like those guys in my memory were like more morose and kind of hanging around, standing still and black, and the Screamers were jumping around. At least Tomato was. Anyway, so he hired myself. It was an interesting cast. It was me, Flea. Back then he was Michael. A guy named Steve Hufstetter, who I went on to play with in the Plugs. There's one or two other guys, but our job was basically quality control. Like we just had to make sure that Renee, not that we were the arbiters of taste back then, but you wanted it to be exotic but not amateurish, and it was our job more or less to keep the music uh, as compelling as could be. So I claim absolutely no. I mean, I did nothing audible. It's not like I had
Okay.
any idea what I was doing, certainly. But I guess he saw something in me and in Flea and the rest of us because we were all pretty, nobody had done anything at that point. We were just kids basically hanging around LA.
I didn't even know that Flea was around that long
Yeah.
ago. So
Yeah, he was.
that's kind of a trip too. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Anybody who was still Flea. I mean, I just remember manic energy. God, it was just
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
of control all day. But Renee, was very, he didn't like spending money on anything. But he built this great studio, and he built in that studio. So it's mostly visual studio, but he built an amazing recording studio that he intuited again that it would sound better if the signal, like there's a word called signal path, which means like how long, like it goes from microphone down a cable to a this, to a that, to a this, to a that, and then it gets to a tape machine. And his idea was, well, wouldn't it sound better if that path was as short as possible? So he built his own control surface, which was like people are doing that now. Back then it was insane. Nobody built just a control surface, and it would be like just the shortest signal path to this wonderful tape machine called a Stevens, which is super rare, super valuable. So the studio sounded amazing. Like the music made in there sounded amazing. And not that I had any frame of reference, but like the Top Jimmy record that, we talked about like that, I thought even now, like 40 years later, I put it up, to remaster it. It was like, holy crap, this sounds great. And this was even the second version. So by this, like it sounded great, like 4 generations down. So yeah, it was a remarkable place. I wasn't there very long. I mean, not long after that, was when I entered the Blasters world, and I'm not sure really what happened to the rest of that cast of characters, but
Right.
there was a movie made called Population Zero that's on Netflix, I
Mhm.
believe. That if you watch close, you'll see me, you'll see Flea, you'll see all the guys in there. I mean, we're just in the background, kind of like hanging around in a few scenes.
I'll
You'll
check
see
it
us.
out. I'll
Yeah,
check it out. Tell me a little bit about your experience with Top Jimmy. I know there was just that one record,
right.
and that whole run was short lived, but I mean, that's the reissue of that record is indirectly why we're talking right now.
Yes, indeed. So, Jimmy, for those who don't know, was just like this Falstaffian character, big, hard living, hard drinking, hard singing, hard everything guy. I mean, he basically was trying to kill himself before he hit 30, and he almost, he lasted a little longer, but that's, but he was just from a different time, just completely authentic, and that's, he was beloved by people like Tom Waits and David Lee Roth, about whom they wrote a
Mhm.
song. Those were his pals because he would just entertain the shit out of them anytime they were hanging out or anytime they came to see us. So by that point, I'm playing in his band, and we have this Monday night gig at a place called the Café de Grand. Who, those who don't know, was like there was stuff going on every night of the week in L.A. in that era. Like literally every night of the week, there's stuff going on. But Monday night was generally a few of the clubs were dark, so we played every Monday night, and it was the place to be because there was nowhere else to go.
Cool.
And not only was it was a place to be for like like again like the punk rock scene. It was like all the hair guys would come because David Lee Roth thought Jimmy was cool, and I guess the whiskey was closed. I don't know, but it was not unusual to see the entire panoply of the LA scene at that point. I guess
Right.
the hair bands hadn't quite started yet, but there was still like there was definitely like a harder rock. There's like punk rockers, and then there was guys to the left and right of those guys. Well, I guess all to the
Right.
right of those guys, but yeah, I just remember it was like on any given night, it was you'd look out there and you'd see like actors, actresses. It was just really, really fun place to be.
A mixed bag, so to
Yeah,
speak.
and we were great. I mean, the band was,
Yeah.
with all due respect and all due modesty, it was a killer band, as the record
Mhm.
testifies, because that was all done
Yes.
live. I don't believe there was. I can't
Oh,
remember
really?
overdubbing anything. No, hell no, we're not. It wasn't one of those deals where we'd work on the kick drum for a week, like any of that stuff. No, we would. In my memory, we had played earlier in that evening, and then we went to Renee's place and set up at like, midnight and played, till dawn, till everybody was too drunk to stand, and then came back the next night.
And you had a record.
And we had a record. But
That's
then,
why the energy is so good on that record.
right. But the other part of that story was, so back then, Jimmy, as everybody else did, worshiped X. Like we all just thought that those were literally the coolest people alive in the world. Nothing they do could ever, it's all impeachably beautiful and wonderful. So through that lens, Jimmy became, um, he thought that because Ray Manzarek at that point had discovered X and was producing their records. And Jimmy's like, well, we have to get Ray involved. I'm like, well, what did Ray have to do with anything? Like, yeah, he's a cool guy and all, but like, what's
Right.
why, what? So Jimmy, begged me to go talk to Ray. All right, I'll go talk to Ray. So Ray at that point had an office on Hollywood Boulevard, not far from where the Flesh Eaters was recording. I remember it was like a third or fourth floor walk up, and it was a hot day, July. It was just steaming hot. I'm going up the stairs to this place, and there's this horrible smell. I'm like, what the hell is going like, and it's like, but unidentifiable, like not human. It's just like this weird smell. So I finally get to the door, knock on the door. Ray opens the door, and he's holding a bag of what I then learned to be chicken gizzards. That was like you could see
Uh-huh.
like the bag on in my memory, just like he opens the door, there's Ray Manzarek. I was a Doors fan when I was a kid, so it was like kind of cool. But they had like this paper bag, and the bottom of the bag was like literally like soaked through with grease, and the smell was these chicken gizzards that he was eating. So he's like, "Hey, kid, come on in." It was just very uncomfortable. So I sat down, and Ray goes, "Yeah, I heard the Top Jimmy record." I'm like, "Okay, well, what do you think?" He goes, "I think it's great." He goes, "I'd like to produce it." And
Uh-huh.
I'm like, What?" He goes, "Yeah, I think I'd like to produce it." And I said, "Well, Ray, with all due respect, it's done. What you heard is a
It's
finished
done. Yeah.
record." And he goes,
Right.
You're not hearing me. I want to produce it." So he was trying to like just steal it.
Okay.
And, it took me I'm not the sharpest tool in the drawer. It took me a second to I just had to like, "What? You don't no, I produced it. No, it's done. You heard the finished record." He goes, "No, I'm producing it." And like, this went on for, in my head, probably 10 seconds, but it was, I remember just being this is my Hollywood moment. This is my casting couch opportunity here. And I just said, "Ray, I'm sorry. I worked too hard to, I mean, this came out of me working for this crazy Dutch director. I'm not sharing it. I did it. You didn't do it." And so, he's like, "All right, well, fuck you." Here's the door. See ya.
Wow.
And Jimmy was,
Okay.
I don't know what Jimmy thought was going to happen. And when I told him that story, I don't think he believed me. So the record basically sat for 7 years because, at that point, like I
Wow.
said, I was transitioning out of the band by that point, and it's not like Jimmy owed me anything, and I don't think he really, frankly, like the band was working all the time, so it's not like he needed a record to, improve his career. I don't think any of us thought it was going to take 7 years to get out, but it just sat somewhere. And that's why when we did the record, I never kept a copy of it even. I mean, I was just like, at that point for me, I was just like, I'm on to the next thing. So we ended up having to
You're
master the
right. Right.
record from cassette and vinyl because there's
Oh,
there's no
really?
existing copy. Yeah, we don't. I have no idea where it is. It's not like I thought any of this shit was gonna last. You know what I mean? Like
Okay.
in that era, it's just live fast, die young. All that stuff. So we didn't.
Right.
I didn't. It wasn't like I had any thought of posterity or like one day someone's gonna want to reissue this thing.
Live fast, die young sounds like Top Jimmy's credo for life,
Yeah,
basically.
it really was. Tragically, he lived to 47, but I know his last years were not. He wasn't able to do anything.
Well, we're getting to the end of our time. So I just recently discovered about another project I'm very curious about and would love to talk to you a little bit about, and that's the Rebooting Project with
Yes.
Stephen Drost and Scott Amendola. Tell me about that.
So, this would be right at the dawn of COVID when none of us knew if there was gonna be a tomorrow, there was ever gonna be a way to play music live again, like, how am I going to survive? How am I gonna feed my family? All that
Right.
stuff. So, right around, so this would be, what? I don't know. Right, so it's like everything shut down in March, and so in May, a friend of mine named David Katz-Nelson, who worked at Warner Brothers when we were there and was one of the first guys that I knew that left the comfy, well-paying major label recording job to start his own record company. And I remember just thinking, this guy's out of his mind. Like, how's that gonna work? But he did it very successfully, and we've been friends ever since.
I've been a fan of David's for years.
Yes, he has a label called,
Absolutely.
he's got a bunch of different labels, but he makes really interesting records, and he does incredible reissues of, like, he just finds these incredible libraries all over the world and reissues them. In Jewish cosmology, there are like about 50 very morose holidays and one very happy one where you're supposed to stay up all night and drink and basically just celebrate life. And so under COVID, that's obviously a little harder to do. But David had this great idea, and he works for this organization called Reboot, which is basically secular Judaism with it's basically how to live life as a modern Jew. There's no political, it's not like certainly everybody's aghast at what's happening in Israel, but it's basically a safe space for free modern Jews. So he thought of having this all night party on like a live stream party from all over the place for this holiday. And he asked me if I would score the Ten Commandments, like the original version of the Ten Commandments, the silent movies. And I guess I had done another thing for him a couple years prior with a drummer named Scott Amendola, who lives in the Bay Area, who's amazing. And he had I think it was David's idea to reach out to Stephen Jost from the Flamin' Lips. And obviously none of us were busy. So we set about scoring this movie from our little enclave. So Stephen's in Oklahoma City, Scott's in Berkeley, I'm in Portland. And we had this really fascinating sort of like round robin of like sending each other ideas and like, okay, you work on that, I'll work on this, I'll come up with this scene. And it was basically, it kept me from going crazy because it was something to do, music to make every day, this beautiful blank canvas of this incredible movie. And it was just it was like the most fun imaginable. Like I've been lucky enough to have a couple other scoring things. And this was like by far the most fun just because just throw ourselves into it. All the ideas were great. I mean, Steven's a genius, needless to say. So we had a
Yeah.
blast. We ended up doing one more. We did a movie called The Golem, and then last year we did one called without Steven. Unfortunately, he got busy. So I did another one called Breaking Home Ties with a guy named Adam Dorn, who's also known as Motion Worker. He's amazing. Like he gets like Blue Nut Records original tapes and creates like remixes that are amazing out of those and his own music as well. So we had a ball and I think they're all basically viewable on rebooter.org, I believe is the website.
I will make sure I'll double check the link and I'll include it in the YouTube show
Yeah,
notes for
but
anybody who's interested.
I'm very proud of that. Oh, they're all pretty cool.
Yeah, the little bit I've seen I thought was really pretty amazing. So let me ask you a final question because I
Yes,
know you
sir.
got to run. Again, thank you for being here. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you. My pleasure.
What is it every day that keeps you going? What are the reasons each day that you continue to push forward in terms of exploring, doing something new in music, with your work as a musician or as a producer?
It's interesting that so my aging strategy is to work harder than I ever did in my life at
Uh-huh.
my age.
Uh-huh.
And it seems to be working. I don't know.
Okay.
But I feel like I've just scratched the surface in almost every respect. I mean, I feel like I understand record making certainly better than I did when I was doing it back then.
Hmm.
I think I'm a better sax player than I was back then. I think. I don't know. Sometimes I hear that stuff. I thought, who the hell is that guy? Like, oh, it's you. Um, but it's sort of like I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I get to do the thing I love every day, pretty much with amazing people. I don't have to work for anybody. So that's kind of what keeps me going. But I will say, back to something I said earlier, like all this stuff really came from me just saying yes to stuff that in many cases I was either ill-equipped or unequipped to do. But I mean, it happens a little bit less, but it still happens that I get offered something that I feel like, well, I don't know anything about that kind of music, or I don't know why in the world would they call me for this job? But
Right.
I'll just go and say, "Yeah, let's do it. Let's see what," and those are life's best learning experiences when you throw yourself into something you really don't necessarily understand or you think you have this knowledge of. And I just think it's important to scare yourself shitless on a regular basis. So I try to do that, like whenever the opportunity presents itself, not so much anymore, but still happens. And just, say yes and see what happens, basically. And that's served me well my whole life.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Creative Asylum. A quick favor before you go. If you liked this conversation, please be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes drop every Tuesday at 10. You can find us on Instagram and on YouTube at Creative Asylum CA. That's Creative Asylum and the letters CA. Our website is thecapod.com. And our Facebook is the same, facebook.com/thecapod. Until next week, when we'll have a new conversation with another creative disruptor, stay creative in life and at work.